Industrious, efficient, monogamous, and definitely eager. The Canadian beaver is cutting down forests from one end of the planet to the other. From the southern tip of South America to the barrens of the high Arctic, the incredible legacy of nature's super engineer is alive, thriving, and still wreaking havoc wherever it goes. With a dexterous front end engineered for land and powerful hind feet webbed for water, the Canadian beaver is well designed to bridge two worlds, where water meets boreal forest. A landscape architect capable of building itself a home that is a predator-proof bunker, the Beaver Lodge is an ecological marvel. The door is underwater, keeping enemies out and warm air in. Safe and snug inside, they live in tight-knit families that can include up to 8 children. No other animal on Earth builds anything like this. It is the beaver's edge, enabling it to colonize a hemisphere. Of all nature's creations, only coral and man have had a greater impact on our planet. For 30 million years, beaver-like animals have thrived in the Northern Hemisphere. Paleontologist Dick Harrington knows this giant well, the largest beaver species the world has ever known.
The giant beaver originated about 3 million years ago. It developed in size, of course. This is probably the equivalent of a black bear in size. You can see, how big that is. And that if you had a black bear standing on its haunches, it probably wouldn't be very different from what we see here.
The beaver of today and yesterday are built on fundamentally the same body type. The modern beaver is only smaller, except for its tail.
With the modern beaver, it has a very wide spatulate tail, and when it slaps the water, it's an alarm signal, but probably an animal this size wouldn't need such a big alarm signal. I think it would be more alarming in itself.
The giant beaver died out 10,000 years ago, but the search continues for the ancestor of all beavers.
There is probably a common ancestor. It begins with Dipoides here, this really small beaver that we found on Ellesmere Island about 3.5 million years ago.
To search for the origins of the Canadian beaver, Dick Harrington has traveled almost as far as the North Pole. Here, 1,500 kilometers above the modern tree line, a super beaver once thrived.
Well, we're on Ellesmere Island, and we're about 78 degrees 30 minutes latitude north, so this is really the high Arctic. And it's kind of mind-boggling to find remains of a beaver pond at this site. And of course, it is not a modern one. The environment was a lot warmer when these animals were living around here, which is about 3.5 million years old, maybe 3 to 4 million years old.
The wood that Dick's excavating is over 3 million years old, but it burns as if it were cut yesterday. Prehistoric beavers built a dam here. Locked in permafrost for a small eternity, it provides a window into the beaver's ancient past.
Probably about 7 or 8 inches in, you run into frozen ground. It's not too deeply lodged in there. I don't think it's moving a bit. Yeah, there it comes. Oh yeah, this is great because you can see the beaver cutting right across here. You never know what the hell you're going to get in the next shovelful. You know, that's the most exciting part of paleontology, in my opinion. Yeah, it is. Yeah. I found a fragment of a beaver tooth, and it came from just back here behind me yesterday. So it's nice to know there's still some fossils in there. You always hope as a paleontologist to find unique and interesting and scientifically important specimens, and this has about all of those characters.
Along with the shark, the beaver is one of the few survivors of an evolutionary era 30 million years in the making. And although both the Canadian and European subspecies have evolved, only the Canadian has maintained the ability to build lodges and dams, changed the course of man's own history, and transformed entire continents. Nestled between the Rocky Mountain foothills and the Great Plains of central Alberta, Elk Island National Park is a rectangle of green amidst endless fields of grain. It's an ideal home for the beaver. Elk Island is home to the highest year-round concentrations of ungulates, or large hoofed mammals on Earth. Per square kilometer, there are more animals with hooves here than on Africa's Serengeti Plain. Elk Island is unique, a completely closed park system. It's fenced off from the outside world to make sure that bison and elk don't venture onto surrounding highways and cattle don't wander in. Set aside in 1906 to protect the last wild elk on the prairies, it's a perfect environment for the beaver's greatest admirers to study nature's superhero.
My personal history with beaver goes back to my childhood. I grew up adjacent to a beaver colony, a whole pond system maintained and structured by beaver. And that's where I spent my childhood, was associating with the beaver in those colonies. And coming to Elk Island was kind of like going back to that. The region is called the Beaver Hills because it had historically a very high population of beaver. People often refer to the beaver as being a very industrious engineer in the landscape, and in fact they are. When you compare their behavior to a land-dwelling species like the bison, for instance, they're totally different. A bison moves into this system, he has to seek out forage, consume it, and then move on and seek out more forage. Well, the beaver don't do that. They bring the forage to themselves. They create situations where they gather large quantities of woody material back to a central communal spot. And it takes a tremendous amount of effort and ingenuity on their part sometimes. That's totally unlike most other species, especially large mammal species.
Beavers use their ingenuity to change the world with their ponds, which they don't find but create by flooding narrow streams with amazing dams. Glynis Hood is a biologist studying the impact of beavers on the park, and she's as eager as they are.
This is an incredible structure. There are no other animals in the wild that you'll see that can create something like this. This is just a civil engineering feat that they've done here. The dams create this moat around the castle, and it's home for the whole colony. Now, how they build these things is just amazing, because they choose an area in the stream where it's usually the narrowest spot so that they don't have to put as much effort in as if it was a long breach in the stream. And they'll often start on the edge of the stream that has the least amount of current. And they'll put down some willows, they'll carry them over in their mouth, they'll go down and they'll pack them down either with rocks, which they carry in their hands, or with mud.
These branches aren't simply rammed into the stream bank. This beaver is also a super weaver. They build a dam by literally knitting willow branches together, layer upon layer, until an intricate barrier is created.
When you get a stream like this where there's not much water pressure against the dam, or there's not a lot of stream flow, they often will seal it right tight with mud. But when you get dams in faster flowing streams, they'll actually allow some water to trickle through so that it doesn't erode the dam completely. So they'll actually accommodate the dam to what kind of current you have behind it.
In Elk Island, retreating Ice Age glaciers left behind subtle hills and bowls, ideal for the beaver to transform narrow streams into a network of ponds. New water on the land means more new growth, more food for the ungulates, and a lot more.
Everything that lives here relies upon the presence of a beaver pond in one way or the other. The park has a tremendously rich avifauna resource. 220 some different bird species either live or pass through here, most of which associated at one time or another with a wetland like this. And it's critical to the survival of just about everything that lives within Elk Island National Park.
The beaver is known as a keystone species, an animal capable of affecting entire ecosystems. In Elk Island, they've created new wetlands, inspiring a vast diversity of vegetation to grow. They've also opened up the forest canopy by cutting down trees. And they've created areas where many species of amphibians and fish can thrive. In all, the beaver's energetic re-engineering activities create a more diverse, densely populated, and healthy ecosystem.
Actually, if I were to design the perfect animal, I'd design the beaver, to tell you the truth. Because the things that this animal has going for it to live in the environment that it does are just incredible. Like when you look at the beaver's teeth, you see this orange enamel on the front, which is very, very hard. And then underneath the tooth is a lot softer material. The back part of the tooth wears down faster than the front part, so that it's very, very sharp all the time, so you end up with this chisel-like feature that allows it to chew through wood really well. Now, being an aquatic animal, they've got a couple of things that they've adapted. They can be underwater for up to 15 minutes. They have a specially adapted respiratory system. And when they submerge, their nose and their ears have valves in them that shut them off so that they can't get water in there. Also, their lips are actually behind their teeth, so that when they chew underwater, they don't get water rushing down into their throat. With their eyes, they have a third eyelid that can go over to protect their eyes from the water. And they're very, very streamlined to the water, and then they've got this wonderful tail that acts like a rudder and a warning device for them. So they're just perfectly designed for what they're made to do.
But all that Super Beaver really wants is to eat a tree in peace. And that can mean taking down 200 of them a year. Yet beavers don't actually like the taste of wood. It's the bark they're after, with a side order of branches and leaves. The rest is used as construction material or simply left where it fell.
Yeah, this is a great example of one of the larger trees. You can see that it's already over 50 centimeters in diameter that they've knocked this tree down. And just like a woodworker with his chisel, the beavers knock out these wood chips that are just Actually, if you put it next to my hand, they're actually very large. And as you can see, there's teeth marks all throughout the stump, and basically a small rodent is able to take down a tree that's absolutely massive. Because not only are they going for food, but if beaver don't chew wood and chew trees, their teeth continually grow, and they actually get to the point where they can't chew at all and they'll die. So chewing is a way to keep them alive as well.
These lumberjacks of the wild run a family business. Parents and their children, called kits, work closely to gather food for their daily diet or to stockpile for the winter ahead. A single lodge can contain up to 12 beavers, and tonight is a rare glimpse of the whole family at work.
Tonight we've counted at least 8 beaver, if not 9, from all age ranges. There's ones that were just born this year and emerged in July, and the adults, and they're just gathering up food for the fall and to put into their food cache. It's just great.
Once they were slaughtered almost to extinction, but the super beaver has risen again to become, at least here, a superhero. And now it's the park's only chance against an upcoming catastrophe. In the 18th and 19th centuries, European fur traders had an insatiable appetite for Canadian beaver pelts. The two-tone qualities of a shiny, durable outer layer with a soft felt underside made it an industry favorite. So when Europeans opened up the New World, it was in search of beavers.
Now what's even more amazing in Elk Island is that during the fur trade in the 1850s, by the 1850s actually, beaver were completely wiped out of this area. There weren't any beaver around at all.
These aerial photographs of Elk Island National Park from the 1920s show a surprising impact of the beaver's extermination. For almost a century, more than 99% of the land was dry.
And then they were successfully reintroduced in 1941. The beaver started damming up streams and impounding water, and it went from less than 1% to almost 8% coverage in the park, and it has really helped out maintaining water on the landscape here in Elk Island.
The beaver was able to increase Elk Island's water coverage tenfold because of how they operate. Beavers colonize not as a single lodge, but in a network of them, spread across the landscape. When a family gets too big for its pond, the kits, at about 2 years of age, are forced to emigrate to a neighboring waterway. It's the riskiest trip of their young lives. Traveling on land, they're almost defenseless and quickly join the food chain as easy prey for bears, wolves, and coyotes. But those who do make it to a new source of water become the founding fathers of a fresh chain of ponds. Because of this consistent pattern of expansion, it's hard to tell from these lush meadows and forests that Elk Island National Park is experiencing the worst drought in over 130 years. In times like this, it's easy to understand why First Nations people valued the super beaver for more than just its fur.
And particularly on the plains, First Nations people had a very high respect for the beaver as a species and didn't harvest the animal very much. And the reason for that was that if you ever a person wandering across the Great Plains of Central North America in a drought like we're experiencing right now, there's 2 things you need to survive, or 3 things: food, shelter, and water. And during a drought, where do you find water in the Great Plains? Either in major river courses or in the tributaries that feed them. And those tributaries, if they're dammed up by beaver, have a year-round permanent source of water.
In a drought, the pressures on any ecosystem are intense. Elk Island's large land animals depend on the beaver's water management practices to survive. The wardens have even seen wildlife running into the park because it's the only place where there is water. Here, the moose, the largest land animal, doesn't have to give up its favorite forage, which studies have shown to be the growth on the edge of beaver ponds. And elk, for whom the national park was created, can thank only the beaver for keeping their safe haven from becoming a dust bowl. In just 60 years, the Elk Island beaver population has increased from 2 reintroduced animals to over 3,000. But although they're now influential enough to reduce the effects of a drought, pond boundaries have still been dramatically reduced, exposing soggy mudflats that create new dangers. And despite the beaver's best efforts, this drought will still claim her dead.
This is an adult cow elk that entered this pond system probably for a drink. And it was the last decision she made because she got mired in the mud and eventually succumbed to the stress of being mired and probably drowned in her sleep eventually.
These newly exposed mudflats that are a death trap to others are also a fresh bonanza of marsh grasses for the beaver. And while ungulates need 4 stomachs to squeeze nutrition from grass, the beaver has only 1 stomach, and the gift of coprophagy.
That's kind of gross, but it works really well for beaver, is it will defecate, and then it can eat that material again and get the nutrients that were left the first time around out again. And that's very common for beaver to do. And they actually have 2 different types of pellets, the ones that stay out and the ones that get re-ingested.
Even when the drought appears to be securing a solid foothold on its territory, drying it to a no man's land, Super Beaver doesn't give up. He digs in.
This is one of the ponds that was probably the most consistently filled ponds that I chose for my study area. It was one of the ponds where we had a long-term beaver population and very stable as far as water levels and beaver. The air photos show it and the beaver records show it. What we have now is basically a mudflat.
Instead of surrendering to the drought, the beavers here have dug a deep network of trenches throughout their former pond to keep water on the land.
Beaver naturally make channels, and they usually make channels from the pond edge up into the woody area, and that's normal. What we don't see are channels in the middle of the pond just to maintain water levels. That is something I've never seen before, trying to just keep some sort of water level here so they have access throughout their original territory.
Man has learned from Elk Island that when conditions are right, this amazing rodent makes the ecosystem a paradise for all. And when conditions are devastating, it keeps paradise from becoming a desert. But man still hasn't learned that transplanting a species like the beaver into a foreign ecosystem is like welcoming the serpent to Eden. It may look like North America's Great Rocky Mountains, but this is actually the southern tip of South America. 14,000 kilometers from its Canadian birthplace, Tierra del Fuego has become a new home and a new conquest for the super beaver. This last piece of land before Antarctica is well known for its wicked winds, dangerous seas, a lot of penguins, and now the beaver. The great Charles Darwin himself visited Tierra del Fuego in 1832, and even he could not have imagined what would sprout here only a century later. Tierra del Fuego is a strange, enchanted land, isolated at the end of the world, a place where life has evolved all on its own. Here, only migrating seabirds and marine life could come and go as they please. There's only one principal type of tree, the southern beech. Moss dominates the forest. Rabbits were introduced and still run wild. There are no frogs or snakes, in fact, no reptiles or amphibians of any kind. There are few land animals. Nothing could get on or off this continental dead end. Biodiversity on the land is amazingly low, but what is here in abundance. For a beaver, that means massive, virgin forests, its favorite food and habitat. With no competition or predators around, it's a perfect recipe for disaster. In 1947, the Argentine government of Jhon imported 25 pairs of beavers from Canada to inspire a local fur industry in Ushuaia, the southernmost city in the world. But the experiment failed miserably. It's so cold here that the imported beavers grew thick, greasy pelts, unsuitable for the fur trade. And when the fur farming stopped, it wasn't long before some escaped into the wild. The beaver, whose incisors never stop growing and who must constantly gnaw on wood or die, continued to feed and multiply. Today, there are over 100,000 beavers on Tierra del Fuego. Julio Escobar hopes to find a way to control this now out-of-control population. Down below, the forest floor has been decimated by the beavers, and ponds and dams litter the landscape. For over a decade, Julio has tracked this foreign invader and the mounting damage.
The story of the beavers here is very interesting. I mean, it's truly amazing to see a place I've known since I was a child dynamically shifting before my eyes, with dramatic new environmental changes and the different perspectives that come with them.
Julio has no trouble finding his super beavers. Signs of their ferocious appetite are everywhere. His first stop is a valley where beaver dams have flooded a vast expanse of forest, turning it into a virtual tree cemetery.
The combined impacts of the beavers here may or may not be environmentally sustainable. I mean, this impact is significant.
For waterfowl, the beaver's invasion has been a bonanza, and tourists love the animal. The only beaver colony in the southern hemisphere is a star attraction. But in the 1980s, the population reached critical mass, and now ranch owners are preparing to go to war.
This place, 50,000 acres, was donated to my great-grandfather for his work as a missionary with the Yaghan Indians in 1886. The beavers to us are a plague. They do an awful lot of damage. Gain fence posts. If you don't peel the bark off a fence post, or else use old dried posts, in a couple of days you'll have them chewed through. So most of our fences are in valleys because it's the only place you can really dig a post hole. Well, the beavers build dams usually in series in these valleys and cover up our fences. It was to divide two fields for winter use and summer use. Once there was only 2 strands of the wire left. The rest were all underwater, which froze over, and then the sheep just walked right across.
In Tierra del Fuego, beavers and humans are now in direct competition. Both species like the valleys, where there's plenty of water and trees. But today it's the beaver that's winning this contest of wills, forcing landowners to take matters into their own hands.
Well, for beaver control, we just use shoot the beavers. We don't use traps because we find them rather dangerous. We will run over them with a car if we can, if we find them on the road. Since the houses are out in the lakes that they form, dogs can't get at them. They're safe, which makes them able to keep increasing.
With no predators to worry about, the Argentine beaver has lost its sense of fear. Now the next stage of their invasion has begun, and no one knows if it can be stopped. The Canadian beaver, valley by valley, is slowly colonizing Tierra del Fuego and looking north to the continent beyond.
Looking throughout the island here in Tierra del Fuego and seeing how much of the valleys, the most physically ideal places for the beaver, have already been taken over by them, it's 100% taken already. So it raises an important question. Will the pressures of their own population growth force them to now expand into less ideal areas where they wouldn't normally go?
In only 50 years, 50 beavers have grown to become 100,000. With no predators around, they have a license to chew and can wander anywhere they like. And when they get tired of walking, they simply flood the forest.
First, they colonized the valleys in the south of the island in the 80s and then moved north in the 90s.
But the beaver of Tierra del Fuego has colonized more than just valleys. Even high on mountain slopes, places they rarely go in Canada, they've made a home. It probably took days to climb this high, and Julio has a theory on what kept them going. Studies have shown that beavers will work incessantly to stop the sound of running water. It seems to drive them a little crazy. One researcher placed speakers playing recorded water noises within range of the beavers. Soon enough, the speakers were packed in mud, stifling the sound. Julio believes that beavers heard the sound of meltwater running down the side of this mountain. Driven by instinct, they climbed up to stop the maddening noise. Only in a land without predators would they dare to scale such heights. Today, Julio too has climbed up to investigate the discovery of a mountain beaver dam that broke. The dry pond bed reveals a labyrinth of intricate tunnels, a new insight into the beaver's work ethic. They chose to build in a peat bog which retains water naturally and offers easy, deep digging. But when spring arrived, meltwater from these snow-covered mountains proved too much, and the dam buckled under the pressure. The result was a mudslide that destroyed everything in its path and blocked the road below for days. Anyone in its way would have been killed. Now it's no surprise that Julio can see only one solution, a way that includes a renewed role for the hunter.
This could be the only way to control our beaver problem. The beaver population is going to keep growing, and there's nothing here in nature to stop it. So the only possible solution is to implement a program recruiting the locals to become hunters. Extracting them individually is our only chance to start containing the beaver problem.
Controlar.
Once again, but this time at the opposite end of the world, it means setting a trap, and then partially destroying the dam to bait the beaver into renovations. The best solution of all is to use the beaver's own industry against itself. The government has now implemented a bounty and will pay 5 pesos for every beaver tail turned in. But Julio concedes it's not enough to stop the growing tide of beavers that has already flooded valleys and mountains, forcing this freshwater creature to conquer the surrounding ocean itself. Julio has hired a boat to investigate reports that the beaver has already reached the islands to the north. If they are there, they're on their way to the mainland.
We don't know how many islands the beavers have reached, but it's many, many islands. Salt water is obviously not a problem for them. And given the beavers' size, these are huge distances they're traveling. So soon, the problem will be, how do we cope with them on the mainland?
In its constant quest for new territory, Super Beaver has now built a dam on the edge of the ocean. Now a saltwater swimmer, it's quite possible that within 10 years, it will reach the mainland. And if it does, that crisis could make the invasion of Tierra del Fuego seem like a minor skirmish. So far, South America's best defense against the super beaver's expansion from Tierra del Fuego to the mainland has been the natural barrier of the Darwin Mountains. But if it does reach the continent, it could be a disaster. The problem is, like Tierra del Fuego, the southern mainland doesn't have much biodiversity either. There aren't enough of the right kind of plants to turn flooded forest into healthy marsh. So instead of inspiring life like it does in Canada, the beaver here destroys ecosystems. Once the beaver invades the mainland, the forests of the Andes' eastern slopes, even Amazonia itself, are within reach. And if it does make it all the way to the rainforests of Brazil, it will be up to the crocodile and piranha to win the battle of the teeth that threatens an entire continent. But today, the Canadian beaver isn't just threatening South America. It's also invaded Russia and parts of Scandinavia. Here too it's causing ecological havoc and forcing the less industrious European beaver to retreat from its own ancient and slightly drier habitat. One Russian scientist, comparing the two, said that the Canadian beavers have more stamina and adaptability. They are more active and they can survive better, while a British newspaper sniffed at Canadian beavers as uncivilized brutes. Introducing a foreign animal to a fragile new habitat is a man-made formula for a natural disaster. But at home in Canada, the beaver has been working miracles for thousands of years. They may be a plague to South American ranchers, but here farmers consider them a blessing. When Super Beaver builds his hideout, the lodge, he hauls a massive amount of wood into the water, and as it slowly rots, nitrogen is deposited on the muddy bottoms of ponds and streams. Incredibly, this natural fertilizer has helped to create almost all of North America's best farmland.
Well, this is very typical of what you get outside of Elk Island, because you've got agricultural fields right up to the boundary in many cases, and also urban development happening at an explosive rate in Alberta. So what you have here is a field for agricultural purposes, but what you can see are some remnant wetlands that might have been here before. And they would have probably been connected to the system that we just saw through waterways and the like. So this would have been beaver habitat. You've got another remnant wetland over there as well.
From farming to fur trading, the beaver's indisputable role in the creation of a country has not gone unnoticed.
Beaver are the Canadian symbol, because of its influence on the exploration and development of this country. The Hudson's Bay Company and their exploration of the West, because of the presence of beaver, opened up this country. And beaver are a very resourceful, tough, and intelligent species, much like Canadians.
But the beaver was an integral part of Canada, long before people ever came here. Evolution dealt it a winning hand millions of years ago. Paleontologist Dick Harrington has even found evidence of it close to the North Pole.
As far as the beavers and their behavior, I think that a type of behavior that's established very early on and is successful will tend to remain in that line. And of course, we know it's still very successful because of these transfers to South America, and we've seen what kind of havoc they've been able to wreak down there.
From the top of the globe all the way to the bottom, the Canadian beaver is now taking its best shot at world domination.
With all the changes that it makes to its habitat, and there are many other animals that modify their surroundings, but when you compare any of them to what the beaver does, making a whole new world out of whatever environment it finds to live in, it truly makes it a super beaver.
Realmente sí, es un super beaver.
As long as there is wood, as long as there is running water, nature's super beaver will fight for lodges, dams, and the Canadian way. Stronger than an ice age and unfazed by global warming, this modest rodent is changing the world. Superhero or supervillain? Only time will tell.